Hello there. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. I'm going to be basically be doing a little update on the story that we had last year. So let's just see where we were. I told you all about the origins of our campaign. At that point, we had just had the March 2006 municipal elections. And after that, a lot of stuff happened. Holland at that point, during those March elections, was 99% e-voting. And Amsterdam had just switched to e-voting from paper ballots. And this was what the market looked like. 90% of the Dutch population voted on this machine you see on the left, the NIDAP, usually the ES3B machine, and 10% voted on this SDU NuVote machine that you see over there. So when I went to vote, I got to use the NuVote because I live in Amsterdam. And the NuVote is a Windows-based touchscreen machine that had to meet no requirements whatsoever regarding computer security, as long as it could stand vibration and moisture and deal with a glass of water that fell over it and something. Also, the SDU NuVote had a wireless GPRS modem built in, which we weren't too happy about. We started researching that. I got very angry, and a number of my friends got very angry at the polling station. We started researching, and we found out that not only did these machines not have to meet any realistic specifications, but also these companies that were running these machines had completely taken over the election, especially SDU, the former state printing press, which had been privatized. Their business model was basically, we'll bring in the computers, we'll bring in the entire election, we'll train the poll workers, and in the evening we'll just tell you who won. So you don't have to stress your municipal organization running these pesky elections. We'll do it completely for you. So we set up a campaign basically around two issues. Voting is not very transparent. You can't really see if the result is really what it's meant to be. And because they were claiming it's very secure, we said, and it's not very secure either. Our campaign was very media-based. We had a lot of newspaper articles, a lot of press coverage, and we also did a lot of freedom of information requests. So we used the law, in this case the Freedom of Information Law, very extensively. Things didn't really get out of hand until we got hold of NADAP computers, the voting system that 90% of the country used. And we showed that you could change the software and that there were radio emission problems. All of this was in my talk last year, so I'll just go over it really quickly. Then they decided to test the radio problems also against this other brand, the SDU NuVote, and they found out that you could receive clearly at 40 or 50 meters distance the contents of the display, in other words, what you were voting for. With amateur equipment, just a TV receiver, you could receive what was going on. As a result of all of this, they suspended that license, and they also, the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, sent an election observation mission to the Netherlands, and the government appointed 2 commissions. I'll come back to that later. Then there were the national parliamentary elections, at which point we, instead of doing anything anarchist, we distributed apple pies to all the 500-something Amsterdam polling stations, because we were so happy that they were counting paper again, because they had outlawed this SDU NuVote machine. Basically, before these people could get into a bad mood for having to spend an extra hour or two, we came by with an apple pie and a letter explaining what we had done, why we had done it, and why it was important. Which is where we discovered that there's a major media hole, and that if you have something that is related to the elections but is not party related in the morning of the elections, you'll get any amount of media coverage you want, because they're basically just standing around in the polling stations going, well, there's just been a voter, and I think it started to rain. which you know from election morning coverage, it's really boring. The year started, after I talked about this at the Congress, the year started already in January with SDU announcing that they would reapprove, or that they would seek reapproval of the SDU NuVote, and the government had apparently agreed to retest. Better shielding, and they wanted to change the colors because some colors, the contrast between some colors really works well on receivers. And some other color differences are not so easy to see. So they made a display which was red on green. Now, if anybody is familiar with people that are colorblind, but they figured that this was really hard to receive at a distance. It was still the same unpatched Windows installation, there was still the wireless GPRS modem, but that all didn't matter because, of course, there were no requirements for that. But secrecy of the vote was an absolute requirement, so they had to meet that. And they didn't, because apparently on the first test some screw was loose inside the box, which caused it to radiate like hell. And there was all sorts of other interesting problems. I'll just quickly sort of go over the events of this year, so it'll be a little bit of a sort of, and then this happened, and then this happened story. The Kiesraad, which is the electoral council in Holland, it's a little bit, you can compare it, I think, to the Bundeswahlleiter in Germany. We found out that Groenendaal, this company that we talked about last year, I'll come to them later too, was actually calculating the final results, in other words, tabulating the entire election at the Kiesraad offices. But it was actually Groenendaal people doing it. So this whole, in the beginning we were sort of screaming that the whole elections had been privatized. And we thought we were exaggerating, and then we turned out we weren't so much exaggerating after all. Then there was also this Guus de M, a guy in Landert, a municipality in the south of the Netherlands. He was the candidate that got over 180 votes. And out of 1,000 in the precinct that he was operating the NADAP in. So he was a candidate and he was operating the machine and he got very many votes. They did a shadow poll later. A newspaper tracked down half of the people that were voting in his precinct, and they could find 2 votes for him among these people, instead of 90, which would be expected out of those 180. And he was prosecuted and acquitted because there was not enough evidence. So this basically proves that you can do anything with these NADAPs and you will not be convicted. What basically happened, or what people think happened, is people walked away without voting because they have to press not only the candidate button but also the confirm button. And people were not confirming. And everybody that's been sitting behind NADAP machines in elections knows that you have to call people back. Like, sir, madam, you haven't voted yet, could you please press the confirm button as well? So he was sending people away that hadn't voted, and this way he was saving up votes, and then every once in a while he would stand in front of his machine to better position it towards the light or something, and then he would quickly vote that number of votes for himself, or at least so is his accusation. Of course, he's acquitted. There's an appeal, which we'll see on January 4th, so really soon. Then, why is it not advancing? There. Then there's the report by OSCE, the people from the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. They are the election observation people in all of Europe and Africa and Asia. They go all over the world. And they had a report that said, in order to enhance public confidence in DRE voting systems and to provide for meaningful audits and recounts, legislation regulating use of such systems should include provisions for a paper trail or an equivalent verification procedure where it doesn't define what that is. And it says software-dependent vote recording mechanisms which do not permit an independent check on their operation should be phased out, which is very important, I think. It's the first time that they've ever had statements that were this direct. They also said, as you can see in the last paragraph, there should be no secrecy in the voting process. Everybody should be able to understand how it works. Very important, because the OSCE had, on previous elections that they've observed, had been much more careful about electronic voting. It's like, yes, it's just a new kind of voting and you just have to observe it in a different way. You have to look at the certification procedure, and here they clearly said, well, really it isn't good enough. You maybe remember from last year, this is a recycled slide, this is Jan Groenendaal, the man that programmed the election tabulation software in Holland and also for Germany. It's a 3-person company, and they have the exclusive rights to sell the NADAP voting computers in the Netherlands, or they had. And they're also involved in selling them in Germany. And he said, open source is really bad because then everybody knows how it works and that's not secure. And the fact that only a very limited group of people has knowledge can also be seen in a positive light, which I can't think of a more direct insult to my religion. Anyway, this is Jan Groenendaal. And in our campaign, we got an interesting bit of freedom of information material where Jan Groenendaal mails the ministry, and both through email and postal mail. He threatened that if I were to be on this commission, because they hadn't announced who was on it, if I were to be on this commission, he would cease to cooperate on any and all elections. And trying to get me arrested. He was basically pushing the ministry to preventatively arrest me for terrorism or charges like terrorism because I was disrupting society. He also said that the state must buy his company today, or basically immediately, because otherwise he would no longer help out with the 2007 provincial elections. So he knew that the value of his company was rapidly decreasing. And this will all be when the Kiesraad, our electoral council, had already said elections without his help were hardly thinkable, hardly imaginable anymore, because his software was so central in the election process. We also got another interesting bit of correspondence between him and the ministry, between him and the municipalities in his newsletter, which he writes to all his customers, which are the local municipalities. Here he wrote, we have a Freedom of Information Act, it's a good thing, but if you want to be angry at government, just realize that it's all going to come out. Before the ink is dry, it's on the internet for everyone to see, and the media will claim you're blackmailing the government, even though his mail clearly said, if you don't do this, I will not help you out with these elections. And he is now beginning to feel how the DDR citizens must have felt, which is really poor man. Hello. Then we also had this interesting bit where Wikipedia first said the above sentence, where they're turning it down, or their decision against e-voting was actually said by their foreign minister, Amato. So we had the quote that their foreign minister had actually said, well, we'll just not do it because it's easier to falsify, or you won't know whether the results are real. And NADAP, from their IP number, changed it to Cremona municipality was very satisfied, which is of course saying something different. Then the first commission reported. Now the first commission was the commission that was appointed basically to figure out how we got into this mess. Because by then our government realized that things had gone awfully wrong, and that we had machines that nobody could really vouch for, that weren't transparent. The software was made by a company that wouldn't show it to anybody. All sorts of things had gone wrong in the process. And this commission was basically going back 20 or 25 years, or even into the 60s, the first mechanical voting machines in the Netherlands, basically to figure out where the country had gone wrong. And it was a very harsh report which came out. The ministry had been sleeping for 20 years, even though people had been saying, look, this is not right, and you should be looking at these things, and it's not transparent. And they had basically sent very reassuring letters and emails to everybody that came up with that. We had letters from dating 15 years back where they were reassuring people. Really, there's an official bureaucracy that's looking at these machines, and it's really good because we've tested them. And we found all this through the Freedom of Information requests. Anyway, the Secretary of State, the political person dealing with this, said, this is all wrong, we'll do things, and we'll do things differently from now on. Through the Commission report, we also got the letters that this Commission received. And one interesting letter that they had received was from NADAP, the company that makes the voting machines. Why is this thing not help? And NADAP says, look, the OSCE report says open source versus secret proprietary systems, but they do so very carelessly. They don't explain what open source is, and people